Level up your LA Kings experience with the new Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access. Enjoy great seats to the game along with premier dining inside the Lexus Club with all-you-can-eat food and non-alcoholic beverages. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings item and parking with your purchase. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn rewards on each purchase from the only ticket company that rewards you for buying. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings.
You're listening to an LA Kings podcast. For more episodes of this and every other Kings program, visit lakings.com/podcast.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
We're continuing our player evaluation series. Joining me today, Daryl Evans. How are you doing today, Daryl?
Absolutely wonderful. Jess, how about yourself?
I'm excellent, thanks. It's been a really, really productive and really positive week for me personally, so I'm happy to be doing this. And, of course, Ed Egros, how are you doing today, Ed?
Doing very well. I had my annual physical this morning, so I got all the shots and boosters, all that good stuff. So even though this is an only podcast, only gesticulate with one arm.
Out of curiosity, Ed, I don't know your age. Are you of the age where physicals require an uncomfortable element?
Not yet. Not yet.
Well, good for you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was warned. The doctor did say, don't worry, it's coming.
Yeah. Well.
So it was all peaches then today for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Come on now. I was actually... As long as we're talking about peaches, for anyone who didn't listen to our last one, I don't like the feel of peaches on my tongue. I was talking to a friend of mine who's big into cooking. She's been in food prep professionally in multiple different phases of her life. And we were just talking about the phenomenon that your tongue, if you look at something, you know what it feels like if you would put your tongue on it without ever putting your tongue on it. Which is a weird psychological thing. Like you could just look at something and know what it would feel like if you licked it. I don't know. So I don't like peaches. We're just getting back to that. Anyway, we're gonna dive into four forwards on this episode. And I want to start with Viktor Arvidsson. And part of the reason I wanted to start with Viktor Arvidsson is he only played 18 games this season. But I felt like even though he only played 18 games, his shadow loomed over the season. When was he going to come back? He came back. He played Daryl, 3 games and 15 seconds, I think, of the 4th game. Yep. Before leaving again. Then he came back, and his presence was enough to change the lineup each time he came back. It moved people around. The things that he can do and the things that they hoped he would do caused decisions to be made. And also, he's an unrestricted free agent on July 1st, and it's not clear whether or not he will be returning to the LA Kings. So, Ed, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but I have been for the past few seasons on social media and on my various platforms declaring that I believe Viktor Arvidsson is the best playmaker on the team. And I chose that word very carefully, not the best passer, not the best player, but the best playmaker. Now, it started kind of tongue-in-cheek, and it always really was sort of tongue-in-cheek. But in the deep dive that you did into Viktor Arvidsson, was there anything that you could think of that leapt off the page that would support that claim?
Couple things, really. Number one of the things that I think we're all in agreement on is this idea that the Kings do need to generate more forecheck chances. And when Arvidsson was out there, he generated a quarter of them per game, which led the team. Again,
quarter of all the chances that the team generated?
No, 0.25 forecheck chances per game.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly right. Which does lead the team. Granted, we are talking about small sample sizes here, but if you are doing enough on the forecheck, then that's going to stand out, both in terms of the eye test, but also in terms of the numbers. So I think that is probably one of the reasons, why I did see on your social media, Jess, many times about, your praise for Arvidsson. So I think that's a really important thing. Huge on the power play. Also a big deal there. Spent 65% of his time in the offensive zone. That's greater in the 90th percentile. Also really effective in the neutral zone on the penalty kill, spending 38% of his time there. That's in the 99th percentile. So here's someone who does know how to camp out there, also potentially on the BK turning defense into offense, but at the very least being able to, generate whatever may come his way as far as, stopping that. Kings are already very good on the PK, with or without him. But I think he does add that additional element as far as, trying to at least keep offenses, a little bit more gun shy, perhaps, on the PK. I think that's safe to say. 1.56 slot shots per game did lead the team, again, small sample size there. But you do have enough elements that I think the Kings were missing without him that do really stand out. And I think for that reason, there's something to be said for his overall presence where, yeah, maybe he wasn't there that often, but you could tell when he was on the ice that there was a different look and feel to the Kings.
Daryl, I'd love to have you weigh in on the notion of Viktor Arvidsson improving the forecheck attack.
Yeah, I think exactly what was just said there by Ed. I think it's very evident when he's on the ice, he has an impact, he's involved. And even though, be it a small sample size, Viktor Arvidsson, his game, very seldom do you see anything different from what was explained right there in that short little period. He's in there, his tenacity on the forecheck, the right-handed shot on the power play. He's willing to go to those hard areas, down low on the cycle, below the hash marks when he, Danault, and Moore have been together. They've been just relentless out there. They just keep taking the puck right back to the net. And for his size, willing to get into the hard areas. He does all the little things that you want to do. And I think, when he wasn't in the lineup, it was evident that the Kings were missing that element. When he did return to the lineup, it was an immediate effect in New Jersey. I remember he stepped on the ice for the first shift of the game. You felt he was out there. His teammates knew he was there. The opposition knew that he was there. And that really doesn't change too much. Again, being that he's a right-handed shot, he helps the power play out. I think he's a guy that can use in all situations. He's a guy that can finish. He's a guy that can make plays. He complements the guys that he's on the ice with in an unselfish way. And I think because of the way the year went, that he wasn't able to play a full season, put the big numbers up, I think that plays into the Kings' favor with regards to talking about a contract.
Todd McClellan used to talk about batting order or the batting lineup. And he'd say, if you have one guy out, everybody has to bump up a space and it gets them out of their spot. And then if you add somebody into, a spot more suited to them, it bumps everybody down into the roles. Is it that simple, Daryl, when you have a guy like Viktor Arvidsson out of the lineup? Because on a, best night, he's maybe playing 15 to 18 minutes. So all those good things that he's doing is still not on the ice for more than half of the game. Is it just that when he's there, then somebody else doesn't have to step in and try and replicate what he does, and then someone else doesn't have to step in and replicate what that like? Is it that knock-on effect?
Yeah, it's it's kind of like a domino type of thing. I think when a guy has to step in for a shift or two through the course of a game, or maybe with a small injury where it's a couple of games, generally adrenaline will carry you through those, and sometimes it's a combination of maybe two or three guys that get put into different spots in the ice, whether it's offensive zone, defensive zone, that can fill that hole. But when it's a long period of time, you really miss that. And with Arvidsson being in that top six slot, that allows other guys to go down. And that gets them more preferred matchups, which makes the Kings a stronger team. And because of the personnel that the Kings have in their lineup, that should favor them. There's not too many teams in the National Hockey League when the season started that you'd sit there and say kind of had a dominance in with regards to matchups. I think the Kings were very favorable when they had their full contingent on the ice.
And I was watching a video essay about the steady decline of the slap shot as an offensive option in 5-on-5 NHL attacks. And was talking to somebody about it at the office, and the name Viktor Arvidsson was brought up because the idea is, in this video essay I was watching, and Daryl, you can weigh in on this too if I say something that you want to weigh in on. The video was saying that because NHL defenses are faster than they have been in the past, and because skating has risen across the league, defenses collapse from not only in front of the shooter, but also from behind the shooter. So taking the time to wind up for a slap shot, your time and space is just much less available today than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever. But Viktor Arvidsson is a guy who occasionally will cross the blue line, and if he's got time and space, just wind up and take a slap shot at 5-on-5. But are there like when Viktor Arvidsson came here, he was billed as a shooter, a goal scorer and a shooter whose shot may have fallen off. That was the impression that Nashville had felt like, oh, maybe he's not as effective anymore. It took me about 3 games to say, oh, his game is much more diversified than that. And I actually think his shot is, for my personal perspective, one of the least interesting parts of his game. Is there a way to build a statistical profile? Is a very long way of asking this question. Is there a way to see someone's statistical profile and say, oh, this player is a shooter, passer, grinder, whatever? Like,
absolutely, there is. I think whenever you're talking about, the idea that the slap shot is falling away as far as something important, to me, yes, defense matters, and certainly defenses have gotten better just because athleticism, technology, nutrition, all of those things have gotten better. And so, definitely I think that's a big deal. But also, too, to me, it's more of a physics problem than anything else, where you're looking at ultimately the point in taking a shot is to get the puck to the net as quickly as possible. And when you're doing that wind up, it's kind of like a football player with like a quarterback, for instance. If you're throwing the ball and you've got the ball cocked back way behind your back, then suddenly it's taking too long for you to fire. You should be able to get rid of the football, in a relatively short period of time. And that means you have a nice wind up, but it's a relatively quick. It's not something where you're, basically stretching your entire arm, well behind your back. And to me, that's kind of what a slap shot is as well, where if you spend too much time winding up, then yes, you are going to be able to add some miles per hour on the shot itself. But at the same time, you're taking up so much time that everyone else has that extra second or two to be able to react to what you're doing, whether it's the defense, the goalie, whatever it is. Even if you're a screener, for instance, trying to impede perspective, that's going to be a lot harder to do to sort of maintain your position. So certainly that makes a whole lot of sense to me. But can you build a statistical profile? Absolutely you can. And that comes from where you are on the ice, what you're doing while you're out there, how many passes are you making, where are you passing to? That also matters a great deal. And then you're able to categorize as far as, okay, these are the top passers, these are the top shooters, and where are they shooting from on the ice in terms of, closeness, proximity to the net, the angle in which they're shooting. So you can put all of these things together to get a type of profile, and then you can kind of categorize things that way. And when we're specifically talking about Arvidsson, I'm with you. I don't necessarily think his shot is the most interesting thing. I think it's his puck possession, his forecheck, those kinds of, less obvious basic box score numbers. I think that's what really makes him go.
Yeah, I think when you come down to that slap shot, and I've never looked at Arvidsson as being a so-called pure shooter. Kaliev for the Kings is a shooter, as we see. He's got a real heavy shot, but unfortunately, he's a one-dimensional type of player. We'll talk about him a little bit later, but I think Arvidsson does a great job at just bringing his whole game around it. The way goals are scored today is release. Not necessarily how hard the shot is. It's release and placement, not allowing the goaltender to be able to get set up. Goaltenders are bigger today. They're a bigger presence in the net. And if you can get the puck off your stick quickly, even if they do make the save, chances are you're going to create a rebound by doing that. So it's all release. And I think Arvidsson's done a really good job at adjusting his body. Watch him do it in practice, moving his hips around the puck to get the puck in the right spot, just to get it off his stick quickly to put the goaltender in a more uncomfortable position.
One of the conversations or trends that pops up in conversations, and I think I might have mentioned this last time, I apologize. If you have a guy like Connor McDavid, right, who's obviously the best player in the league by a wide margin, and you go, okay, Connor McDavid is the ideal center for an NHL power play. Or if you have a guy like Alex Ovechkin, who has a very specific talent, and you say, okay, he's the ideal winger for a power play. You put him on top of the face-off dot. Everybody knows what he's going to do. Nobody can stop it. You go, okay, these are the sort of platonic ideals of the positions that we're talking about. But the reality is that the second best version of that player is far less effective than the number one option. The number 3 option is even less effective than that. The number 4 option is even less effective than that. There's 32 teams in the NHL. So now you're getting into the 30th, 40th, 50th, 60th best version of these players. And I'm not trying to compare Viktor Arvidsson to Alex Ovechkin, but the point is when you have a player like Arvidsson who has a varied skill set, And then for whatever reason, he's out of the lineup, Daryl, and people look at him and they reduce him down to like, well, he's got a great shot. So it should be as simple as just plugging, and I'll just pick on Sammy Fagemo for no particular reason. They say, oh, we'll just take Viktor Arvidsson, NHL veteran, you know, has been through the wars, has been through the battles, has proven himself in multiple skill sets, but he has a really good shot. So he's out of the lineup. Okay, we'll just plug in an NHL rookie who also has a good shot, and job done, easy peasy. I mean, it's not that simple, correct?
No, it's not that simple because you look at all the little things that Arvidsson does, and that's what separates him from a guy like Fagemo. Fagemo shoots the puck well, maybe a little split second of extra time down in the American Hockey League that allows him to get his shot off. We saw the totals that he put on the board statistically, but no comparison between the two players. The tenacity, the Kings hope that maybe that'll come out of his game, that he'll be able to play a little bit more in that type of a style, because he does shoot the puck maybe even a little bit better than Arvidsson does. But as regards to the other elements of the game, Victor's got definitely the hands up in all areas.
All right, we're going to move on because I could talk about Viktor Arvidsson all day, but ultimately he played 18 games and we've got other guys to talk about. And I think I just spent 20 minutes talking about Viktor Arvidsson. The next player we're going to move on to is Trevor Moore. And Trevor Moore and Viktor Arvidsson played a lot of games together over the last 2.5 seasons. And Daryl, is it too simple to say that, and I don't mean this to take away from Trevor Moore, because obviously he's earned everything he's gotten, but before he found a home on that line with Phil Danault and Viktor Arvidsson, I think Kings fans and hockey fans at large could be forgiven for not necessarily being familiar with Trevor Moore's career, since they found that combination of players. And it turns out that it may just be Moore and Danault, because anybody you put on that wing seems to do well. But I guess, what is it that Trevor Moore brings to that combination of players, and what is it about his game that not just elevates his line mates, but seems to exponentially elevate that whoever is playing with him on that line with Danault?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities between those three players. They're all very tenacious players. They play the cycle game very well, unselfish, and they'll play down below the hash marks. I think that's when that line is their most effective. They support each other. They're not looking for somebody else to do all the grunt work and look for the reward at the end. They're willing to do all the little things. And I think the chemistry that trio has is what allows them to be able to put up the numbers that they do. It's that tenacity. They're relentless when they're out there, and they do a good job defensively. And I think, prior to maybe Trevor Moore, getting the notoriety for scoring the way he has, look what he did before in the penalty kill, the amount of shorthanded goals that he had. He's got good hands. And to his credit, he's worked a lot on his craft in the offseason over the last few years. Maybe he saw at the end of the tunnel there, this is a chance for me to get a chance to play. And to his credit, he's taken advantage of it. He's worked on those little elements, and it's showing in the results of what he's doing on the ice.
Ed, you talked about the importance of quickness, getting the shot off, and that's something that Trevor Moore, to Daryl's point, really worked on, and you could see it this season. He scored 30-something goals, and a lot of them came from in close. What can you tell us about Trevor Moore's numbers?
Well, part of that is, and this is going to be a word that I know I'm going to be saying a lot over the next several minutes, and that is rebounds. He created 27 rebounds per money puck, which is a top 40 number. And for a team like the Kings with more rebound shots than anyone else, it was Moore and Fiala having a lot to do with that, and having another winger who can poke those loose. Not necessarily something that just anybody can do, but I think when you are able to generate rebounds of the quantity that Trevor Moore does, that to me helps out the entire line about as much as any other skill that he has. Just because whatever the skill set is with that third winger, it's basically plug and play. There's a loose puck that he has created, therefore you go poke it home and then you're good to go. So it's something to me where the rebounds that he created had a lot to do with it. Living in high danger, parts of the ice, that also had a lot to do with his overall success. And not only that, but tons of shots on goal. 31 goals, like you said, is a great number, but he's also fast. And that's probably that second thing that really impressed me about him. 171 speed bursts of over 20 miles per hour. That's excellent. And that's just what you want from a left winger. He can also sprint beyond 22 miles per hour. So it's definitely something where even if, say, a shot is taken from like the blue line, it's some sort of random slap shot, at least he's got the speed to where he's able to track down the loose puck, win those loose puck recoveries, and then be able to poke it home or be able to pass it to someone who's able to poke it home. So there's a lot that he's able to do in the high danger area, which I think is what you want in today's offense.
One of my favorite things on the NHL Edge stat website, and it took me a while to figure it out, but now that I have, I'm a huge fan of it, is the map, the ice map. I don't know what you call it. But, and so, for example,
down by zones.
Yeah, we interviewed Roy and Gavrikov together at one point, and I was looking at their numbers, and I realized that if you look at just that map, they're sort of mirror images of each other. If you look at Trevor Moore, of his 31 goals, 19 were scored. I'd say the lower slot, whatever, right in front of the goal. 2 each from either side, and that's 23 right there. So I mean, like he became really dangerous close to the net this season, Daryl.
Yeah, willing to pay the price to get to those hard areas. Playing on your toes as opposed to your heels. And if he doesn't do that, he's not playing in the National Hockey League. And he's recognized that. He identified it, something that he needed to do. And as when we heard Rob Blake and Jim Hiller talk about, got out of his comfort zone, and that's going into those hard areas, get abused a little bit. And at the end of the day, the rewards are there. So again, credit to him for doing it.
Now, Ed, I asked you before we did this, if you could, to just keep in mind that we're going to be talking about the combination of Moore and Danault,
right?
Because of the rotating cast of wingers, all of whom seem to have had success since they paired 12 and 24 together. So what did you find about the combination of Moore and Danault? And just fair warning to anybody listening who doesn't like listening to me gush about my favorite players, we're about to start talking about Phil Danault, so brace yourselves.
Well, it goes back to rebounds, right? On the one hand, you've got Trevor Moore, who generates a lot of rebounds in and of himself. But then also what Danault is able to do, and this is another metric from Money Puck, it's a metric called rebounds created above expected. And basically what this means is you go in and say, all right, if you are, let's say a shot is made and you figure that the goalie is going to cover it up, but instead, it's able to be pride free and then a rebound chance is created. What that does is it credits you for, say half a rebound over expected or something like that. Basically, was a rebound going to be created after this shot? Yes or no? And then from there, you can add up these fractions of a chance to something that tells you, how good the rebound game is for this one particular skater. And what we found here was that Phillip Danault was 25th in the NHL with 13.6 rebounds created above expected. So yes, Moore can create a lot of rebounds, but Danault is able to create them in ways where you're not necessarily anticipating. Part of that, he does cover a lot of ice, especially in the power play, averaging nearly 9.5 miles per 60 minutes. That's in the 88th percentile. Given sort of the point of hockey, the read and react, so to speak. He is something where those skill sets in terms of creating rebounds that are not necessarily anticipated, that is one of the reasons why the Danault-Moore combination works so well, because they're able to stay in the high danger area instead of having to get back and skate at the other end.
Daryl, Phil Danault strikes me as, I think the reason that he's one of my favorite players is that if I go down the Edge stats thing, I was just looking while Ed was talking, he doesn't have the fastest shot. He's not the fastest skater. He's not the biggest guy. He's not there's no sort of one thing about his game that leaps out where you go, oh, well, of course that guy's going to be a dynamite hockey player. He has this one elite skill or this one specific physical characteristic that sets it out. So if he's effective, that it has to be, effort is such a lazy word to use here, but I'm going to use it. It has to be effort. It has to be tenacity. It has to be hockey IQ. It has to be the sum of his parts being applied, consistently over time.
Yeah, and the sum of his parts, not anything those that you mentioned, like you say, not the hardest shot, not the biggest guy, not this. Again, not the slowest guy, not the softest shot. So you look at the other end of the spectrum, he does everything really, really well. And that's what makes him such a valuable player. And his willingness to engage with his line mates to compete against the opposition that they're on the ice as a trio, or sometimes even activating the defense, that's where he has got a real good IQ in that regard. Recognizing maybe he can't go against a defender that's 6'5", that's got a long reach. He needs to involve a line mate, make a quick pass, give and go plays. That's one of the most effective plays in any sport, where you're moving, an object from one player to another. And I think he does it exceptionally well. Again, his willingness to go to those hard areas. He continues to learn from the experience that he has. He adapts to players with a higher skill set, being a quicker player, a guy with a good shot. He plays to their strengths. He's willing to adapt and be able to fit into the environment in order for himself, his line mates, and then eventually his teams to succeed.
Ed, when Phil Danault was acquired, or maybe it was shortly after, I don't remember exactly when, but we're talking to Jim Fox, and he introduced the idea that you can have somebody who scores 40 goals a season, and that's great. But if their defensive impact on the game sort of cancels that out, then it's a wash. But if you have a guy who scores 20 goals, but prevents the other team from scoring 30, the net impact on your team is a 50-goal swing. And it's one of the reasons that I bristle when people say the point of hockey is to score goals. I always say, no, it's more fun to watch goals scored, right? That makes the highlight reel. But the point of the game is to outscore your opponent. It's not actually to score. A 1-0 win is worth the same as a 9-8 win. Plus minus has been the standard for measuring that, but obviously it's gone out of favor. People understand the limitations of it. It's an imperfect stat, blah, 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 blah. What is the sorry, I like plus minus. What is the best way to represent that impact of, you maybe only score 15 to 20, but you prevent 30 to 40?
Otherwise, we'd be Buffalo, right? This would be the Sabres podcast if we are if we're like that. No, to me, the problem with plus minus is always that goals. Yes, at the end of the day, that's what matters the most. But we don't see those events all that often. What we do see are shots and passes and things like that. And those events, because they are more frequent, give us a better idea of who's able to generate enough of them and put their team in a position for success. And so I'm not a believer in plus minus, because you're dealing with finite events where you can have a lot of variance. And then also, if you are the third winger in the Moore Danault line and you're successful no matter what, well, then maybe that doesn't tell us a whole lot about what you truly are capable of. That you're playing on a really good line. So, that's part of it. But to me, expected goals, that certainly has a lot to do with it. Not just what you have, but what you've allowed as well. And that to me is also a really important thing in terms of figuring out, how good a forward is. When you are on the ice on the defensive end, what are you doing to prevent expected goals? That's also a very important part, in this grand scheme of things, because yes, those shots are going to happen. A lot of them are naturally going to be saved because they're low danger. Any goalie can be able to save them, at least any competent one. But to me, those are the important things in terms of going forward that I think give us a better idea of what that statistical profile really can look like.
Well, I don't like that answer because you said it wasn't plus minus and you started talking about expected goals for it. So I'm going to.
But you knew to expect that from me.
I know, but I'm ignoring it, choosing to ignore it. Daryl, if for whatever reason Viktor Arvidsson is not a member of the LA Kings in the next season, given what we've talked about as far as Moore and Danault and the combination of their talents, is there a type of player that you think would be ideally matched to fill in that role on the other wing?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd be looking for somebody with the same type of credentials, or at least the same type of work ethic. You would like to see maybe, let's just say it was an Arthur Kaliev. If he could take on and embrace the work ethic and the tenacity that those two have, now bring in his shot, you'd think that would pay well to him. I think those two guys can play with anybody. They're going to pull everybody that they're on the ice with into the battle. It's the willingness of the player that jumps on the ice with them to do those little things in order to succeed. If that player doesn't engage like they do, chances are there's not going to be success there. I wouldn't even be surprised if we see, different line combinations. You look at the last couple of years, the Kings have, they've hit the wall, so to speak, as to how far that they've gone. Maybe there's a combination out there that we haven't seen that, although we saw pretty much every combination at some point last year, but maybe there's a combination that might find a little bit of chemistry and magic that will happen in training camp. I think we're going to see a couple of different guys in the lineup, whether it be from the outside or a couple of guys that stepped in and played a few games at the beginning of the year. But it's a new set. I think you erase everything from the past and you move forward, and now you've got to build on it.
Phil Danault has stated on the record multiple times that he likes having a right shot right winger, but he's also stated multiple times on the record that he was perfectly happy playing with Moore and Fiala, and liked playing with Moore and Fiala. So is there any immediate benefit at even strength that you can see to having a right shot right winger on that line? Because at the moment the Kings really only have Alex Laferriere, I think, under contract for next year, who's a right shot player.
Yeah,
there are other guys that might sign contracts, but Thomas signed his extensions.
Yeah. But I think when you look at, there's a lot, and this started with the European players when they first started to come over, was playing their off wing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the opportunity for the one-timer, having the puck in the middle of the ice as you're coming up the wing, giving yourself a better angle as opposed to having to shoot it. And I think because of that eliminated a little bit of the slap shot off the rush as well. I think when the guys were playing their strong side, you saw them shooting maybe from a further distance, more of the perimeter, but using a slap shot. But now with the puck in the middle of the ice and having the defender there, they're utilizing the defenders as a screen. So, I don't know if, Phil might be, saying those type of things that he likes that, maybe a little bit easier to be able to, when you're looking ahead, the guy's stick is in front of you as opposed to back where it's in the wheelhouse. You got to throw the pass there. But Phil's got such a good skill set. I don't think it matters who he plays with, whether it be a left or right on either side.
Ed, as we were talking, I went ahead and looked up the expected goals for percentage over the last 3 seasons for the LA Kings at even strength. And 4 forwards lead the way: Danault, Fiala, Kaliev, and Moore. So no surprise there based on what we've been talking about. All right, we're going to move off of the nice line and its component parts, and we're going to talk about Pierre-Luc Dubois. And I told both of you that I wasn't really sure how to approach this, and here we are, and I'm still not entirely sure, because the reality is Pierre-Luc Dubois publicly said at the exit interviews that he wasn't thrilled with the season he had. Management, coaching staff also all said that they weren't happy with the season that he had, but while acknowledging that he would be the first one to tell you that nobody was happy with the production that we got. Andrei Kopitar, Phil Danault, other players were asked about it and spoke in his defense at the exit interviews. But the reality is, if the Kings want to succeed moving forward, they need more from Pierre-Luc Dubois. That's just all there is to it. So rather than harp on and focus on the elements of his game that weren't there, Ed, can you point to maybe some of the elements that were? And I'll give you a starting point because it was the talking points all season long.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that his 5-on-5 production per 60 was in line with the rest of his career, but that he got less ice time and was not featured on the power play. That seems to be pretty much the starting point for moving forward in how to improve his output.
Right. And I mean, obvious thing here is when you have your ice time reduced, you're not going to have as many points. So, when you're looking at that, you got to, put it into context and put some averages on it. And I think, too, when you're looking sort of at his overall scoring numbers, they're not terrible. They certainly aren't terrible. I think also one element to his game that I think doesn't get talked about enough is his facilitation. There were only 3 Kings that had more than 100 slot passes for the entire season. It was Dubois, it was Kevin Fiala, and Anze Kopitar. So I look at this and say, all right, yes, the scoring may not have been there, but the facilitation certainly was. And we have seen times, during his career, especially like when you're looking at the playoffs, where he has done some really good things offensively. For instance, if you're looking solely at his playoff performances, his best season was probably the 2019-2020 season with Columbus. So this may be an opportunity for the Kings to kind of look at what went well there and see if there are elements that can be replicated to go with this overall ability to facilitate. I mean, Dubois is someone who can skate. He is someone who does have a lot of burst in him. 144 speed bursts over 20 miles per hour. That's in the 85th percentile. 18 to 20 mile per hour bursts are also excellent. So it is something where if he's on a line with which he's comfortable, he is able to create the odd man rush and be able to facilitate that all the way to the end. And also too, I think he's also pretty smart in terms of not necessarily expending too much energy while he's out there on the ice, skating, too hard and maybe not knowing what direction he's supposed to go in, things like that. But I look at someone like Dubois and go, okay, some of that athleticism certainly is there. The ability to create slot passes certainly is there. So this isn't someone who, couldn't do anything at all. There were just certain elements of his game that perhaps need to be accentuated just a little bit more for him to really succeed.
Daryl, you are a former NHL player. You've been a professional hockey coach. You've been a teacher. You've spoken to me about the importance of teaching in your life and how you want to pass it on. You've been successful in business. You're a dynamo. You're constantly going and doing. You are pure incorporated effort brought to human form. So one of the phrases that gets tossed around in the hockey world is better to tame a tiger than to paint stripes on a kitty cat. How do you turn somebody into a model of your behavior if they're not wired like you are?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to continue to preach what you practice, and practice what you preach. You got to go out and you got to lead by example. And, when I look at a player, like Dubois came in and the contract that he got, he was expecting, I think, an elevated role. And for whatever reason, right from the get-go, I think with the injury to Arvidsson, I kind of threw the lines out of sync right off the bat. And it was playing catch-up after that. And I think he's a player, the real cerebral player. He does a lot of thinking, probably too much to his own fault. I think this year he grew in a lot of different ways. I know it when playing with Team Canada, I saw a little bit more of a comfortable player. And I think next year, the Kings as an organization have to pass him on some of that responsibility. You have to feel that, that you're wanted and needed in the environment that you're in. And I don't know if he felt that last year. And that's not to say that it's all his fault. I mean, in order to feel that way or make somebody feel that way about you, you've got to go out there and give them something to, to think about. So it's a double-edged sword there. I think that, you just got to go back again. Last season, you've got to park, and he's got to get himself in the right frame of mind. But I think the organization has to commit to him, as they do with guys like Kopitar and Danault. They've got to give him a line mate or two line mates that they're going to be joined at the hip for a while. Let him build that chemistry. Let him play in the critical situations. And players that, in the role that he has, he's got to see specialty team time. You got to get on the power play. That's, that's one of the greatest rewards as a player that you feel from a coach. When they put you out in those situations, that they're trusting you in there. So he needs to earn that trust from the coaches and then go out and take advantage when those opportunities come.
I wonder if one of the reasons why Dubois didn't necessarily get the ice time that he needed, not necessarily, what's good for the team, but what he specifically needed was just basically where the Kings were, in the playoffs standings, where, yes, the Kings were very much there, but sometimes that spot got a little tenuous at times. And instead of worrying more about developing a player who really needs it, instead it was more about, winning hockey games. And I think it is safe to say that whenever you're looking at the course of an 82-game regular season, development has to be one of those elements that must come together. At the same time, you also got to make the playoffs, and especially with the expectations for the Kings this past season, at a minimum, you have to make it. At a minimum, you got to be able to, potentially get home ice. But, more importantly than that, I think in the grand equation and the great balance between winning and developing, maybe the developing, just because of where they were and how tough the Western Conference was this season, and you had all these great teams, stepping their games up, notably Edmonton, but Vancouver and others, were a part of that. I do wonder if that, sort of victimized what Dubois really was capable of in having less ice time and then being unable to develop into the player that the Kings ultimately needed him to be long term.
Sorry, go ahead, Daryl.
I can just add one thing there, Jess. Like you mentioned that about Dubois again being the player that the Kings want him to be. It's taken Kevin Fiala a couple of seasons to be the player that he has become with the Kings, and I think for the Kings to get a really good understanding at what he is really capable of delivering. And I think they've had to approach it in a couple of different ways. I know there's a lot of frustration in different times and with Fiala's career with the Kings at, the penalties that he was taking, and, you pay him the price, you bench him, you do this and you do that. But he's an asset to the hockey club that might outweigh that other side. So there's a way that he's got to overcome those, some of those penalties he was taking. And I think in the second half of this year, we saw that from Fiala. Hopefully that'll be the case with Dubois as well, that, all right, you take a look at this. I'm sure the coaching staff, management, they'll look at different parts of the season. There's parts where things went really well for Dubois. They'll put a lot of attention to that, try to kind of stretch that out a little bit more and get more of that. Because if Dubois is the player that the Kings expect him to be, the Kings are one heck of a hockey club, him playing at that level.
I want to sort of combine two different things, one that Ed talked about and one that you talked about, Daryl, and that is when Dubois came to the club, I think the assumption, at least on my end, was that the top line would be Kopitar, Byfield, and Kempe. Another line, whether it was the second or third, would be more Danault and Arvidsson. And then another line would be Fiala, Dubois, and Kaliev. Now, Arvidsson got hurt. Kaliev got suspended to start the season. And so suddenly the Danault Moore line had a different look to it. And then to start the season, right, in those first 14, 15 games, whatever it was, Trevor Moore went on a heater. And that line was scoring, right? Remember, Daryl, there were like every game, Trevor Moore would take the scoring lead from Anze Kopitar, and then 5 minutes later, Anze Kopitar would take it right back. And then the next game, Anze Kopitar would extend the lead, and then Trevor Moore would come right. It was like they were both on pace for 40-goal seasons at one point. And so you weren't going to disrupt the Danault Moore fill-in-the-blank line. I think it was Kaliev to start the season, and then it was Fiala later on. But that line was scoring so much that had to be your second line. And that ipso facto bumped Dubois, down to a line with Jared Anderson-Dolan, Alex Laferriere, whoever it was, and no disrespect to those players, but those players were not on pace for 40-goal seasons the way Trevor Moore was. Those players were not on pace for 70-plus point seasons the way Kevin Fiala was. And so through no fault of anybody's other than the fact that the team either didn't want to or couldn't combine, they almost had too many top six players, but not enough top nine players, if that makes sense, because Arvidsson was out. And so you had players sort of mismatched and not necessarily getting ice time or playing in positions that were ideal for them and then therefore for the team.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that, top six players having to be top nine players. If you're going to be a winning hockey club, you find a way. It doesn't matter what line you're on, whether you're on the top line, you're on that fourth line. And I remember when the Kings, their 212 team, 214 teams, where guys were slotted, you had a role. You went out and played your role. You knew that you were contributing. And sometimes this is where you have to put aside all the individual type of thing and realize and recognize the impact that you're going to have upon the team if you do this. And it's tough going from top 6 minutes to top 9 minutes. Those are minutes that guys are accustomed to having. And this is where the coaching staff, you walk a real fine line in spreading those minutes out and critical minutes. And again, a power play, let's say a power play unit goes out and let's say they're fortunate enough to score 10 seconds in. Well, you sure know the coach is probably going back to that unit the next time you get a power play. It's like, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So it makes it a little bit difficult. But everybody has to, realize what their role is. And again, you got to be a little bit more humble out there, put things aside. And the ultimate goal is for the team to succeed. And you have to do your part.
that's a really interesting comparison, though, Daryl, between 12 and 14, because in 2012, the third line was Dwight King, Jarrett Stoll, and Trevor Lewis. And in 2014, the Kings had brought in Marian Gaborik. So suddenly the third line was like Jarrett Stoll, Justin Williams, and Dustin Brown some nights. And so 2012 had a really distinct top six, bottom six, and guys very fit to those specific roles and would execute in that way. And 2014 was a much more top nine type situation where one night it'd be Justin Williams on the third line, one night it'd be Jarrett Stoll, Mike Richards, Dustin Brown, Dwight King might pop up, Trevor Lewis might pop up. Like it was, but because they added that one player. So I don't know what the roster will look like in 2024, 25. Forgot what year it was for a second. But I hope that we see, and I don't even care which direction it is. I just hope, for the sake of the team and the fans and everybody's sanity, that we either see more clearly defined roles and players embrace them or suited to them, one way or the other, right? If we're going to have a top nine, okay, cool. But then you got to have top nine players on that third line. No disrespect to Jared Anderson-Dolan, but I don't know what the most amount of goals he's ever scored in a career is, but I'm willing to bet it's lower than Fiala, Moore, and any of the players that Dubois played with in Winnipeg. Again, not trying to make excuses, because as Dubois said, as his teammates said, as the coaching staff said, as upper management has said repeatedly, for the price it cost to acquire him in assets and for the impact on the team's salary cap that he is, it needs to be more. And it can't be my fear, and I, again, trying to avoid stepping directly on the third rail. My fear is that a lot of time is expended maximizing his production without taking into consideration the impact on the team's record to boost that production. So if at the end of the season, Pierre-Luc Dubois has scored 100 points, but the team has won 5 fewer games, it might look better on the log sheet that, okay, production was enhanced for this one player, but ultimately, Daryl, the number that matters is the points at the end of the season and then how many playoff wins you get.
That's all that matters, and that's what you have to figure out. And this is where the coaching staff and management, you have each individual's his own entity out there. You've got to, deal with those on a personal basis, and then you have combinations of players, guys that have played together, that sometimes don't understand why you take them apart on the line. But if it works for the team, and that's why teams, when things you see all of a sudden like, hey, that worked, the coaches go with that. And it was kind of going on a little bit of a whim or, a gamble, experimenting a little bit. Sometimes when you get injuries, combinations are put together for whatever be the reason. And maybe it was something that the coaching staff or management never even thought about doing. But, again, this is where players, when you want to win, you have to sacrifice. And the ultimate sacrifice is your own personal stuff. And we've seen it happen with a lot of great players in a lot of different sports, that once they accept that, that's when all of a sudden things start to go right. And the Kings are at that stage right now. And they should also be in a position where they're willing to do whatever. Just like when, the year that, Terry Murray, when he lost his coaching job, the Kings as players, they felt very responsible for him losing his job. So when Daryl Sutter came in, they were very receptive as to what he had to say and what he wanted to execute. And they went into it with an open mind, and they executed to a T, going on to win the cup. They have to put themselves back in that mindset. Echoing from Rob Blake and from Jim Hiller, they've got to play uncomfortable. They've been too comfortable the last couple of years. Now they've got to get out of that comfort zone and find that next level. Nobody's going to hand it to them. Only the guys in that room can do it.
And that might require, something during the regular season to make things, a little bit uncomfortable, whether it is, shaking things up or, giving someone additional ice time where you go, really? Why is that? Well, the point is that development does matter in the grand scheme of things. Yep. Something I know I've said to you, Jess, many times is that, yes, it's an 82 game regular season. That's a long time. And yes, you got to make the playoffs. I mean, that's first and foremost. But development, as I said before, also matters a great deal. And the whole idea that, okay, maybe, a high priced player does have more points, it might, equal sacrificing some team wins. But to me, that's not necessarily a bad thing if it means that you are in a better position for key playoff matchups. One of the things that, we've seen over the last few years is that, in terms of playoff matchups, things tend to be a little bit more equal when it comes to that first round. The Kings have gotten Edmonton the last 3 years. That's not necessarily an abnormal thing, when you're looking at today's league, given the playoff structure. So it's a lot easier for, teams to know exactly what they need to be doing because of an anticipated first round matchup. And to me, when we're talking about top 6 versus top 9, my guess, and please feel free to disagree, but top 9 is probably a better approach taking on the Oilers than, say, top 6. If that's the case, then put your team during the regular season in a position to where it becomes top 9. And to me, Dubois is going to be an important part of that idea, assuming it's going to be another high-octane offense that the Kings would face in the first round of next year's playoffs.
I agree with you.
Exactly why they acquired Dubois, was because of the mismatch they had the previous year with Bukestad going up against Lizotte. That was clearly a mismatch that favored the Oilers. So with Dubois coming in, again, going with that same matchup as the Kings ended up having, the Kings felt they're in a better position with Dubois and should be in a better position with Dubois.
However, I'm going to tag up on this, and then I do want to ask Daryl one question before we wrap this conversation. To my point about not enough top 6 players, or too many top 6 players, not enough top 9 players. Excuse me, I'm confusing myself. In the playoffs against Edmonton, Fiala and Dubois, neither of them were in the top 6, and neither of them were on the same line. So our third line center was either Dubois or Lizotte, depending on how you want to look at it. But it was Fiala, Lizotte, and Lewis. Dubois, Laferriere, and Grundstrom, I guess. So one of those two guys is if you don't want to do third line, fourth line, whatever. The point is you didn't get production from either of them, and they were split up. So you couldn't capitalize on that mismatch the way it was envisioned, which is, okay, yes, if Kopitar's line and Danault's line are going head-to-head with McDavid and Draisaitl, and you're balancing them out 5-on-5, then you should feast on the other matchups. But our lines were confused because those were lines that had not been playing together all year. And like I said, I'm not sure why the combination that was envisioned at the start of the season didn't last, but that's a whole other thing. Daryl, there's one thing I want to drill down on before we wrap this up, because it's a word that you use to describe Dubois, and Jim Fox has used it too. And I think I know what it means, but I just want to double check. You said he was a cerebral player. And when I hear it, what I hear is athletes need to be, the reason that you drill drills and practice and teach systems and all that is so that in the game, when a moment happens and you need to make a decision, you don't have to think about the decision. You just make the decision. And every half second you take to think about making the decision is a half second that your opponent is pouncing on you and taking away opportunities. Is that what you mean when you're saying cerebral? That instinctive reaction time isn't there yet?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that it's not there yet. It's just when you're a cerebral player, sometimes you tend to think a little bit too much, and that can play to a fault of an athlete. Our game is such a quick game. It's an action-reaction type of thing. I use the analogy of a 100-meter race at the Olympics, and it's not even a 10-second race anymore. So if you're 1 second behind, you're 10 meters behind that guy. You're not even in a race. You shouldn't even have trained for, I might as well go run against them because I'm not going to win the race either. So
right.
When we're talking such a small split second, and I think when Dubois is able to kind of park that a little bit and just go out there, regardless if it's the right thing or the wrong thing, if you're making a mistake at 100 miles an hour, sometimes it's better than thinking of what to do out there, because that allows your teammates and everybody you're on the ice with to be able to react to the situation, what's happening. So it's nothing that cannot be adjusted, but sometimes just that split second of trying to figure something out as opposed to just doing what your body tells you to do.
If anybody wants some extra homework reading to really wrinkle your brain and cook your noodle, look into the concept of consciousness and whether or not free will even exists, and whether or not consciousness is just a post facto justification of what your instincts have led you to do in the first place. I like your eyebrows going up there, Ed. But or if you just want to read who's the goalie for the Ken Dryden's autobiography, he talked about sometimes he could feel his body reacting to make a save off a shot, and he hadn't even thought about it. It was just happening. So anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this episode. We will be back in a few days to finish up our player evaluations with the top 4 forwards on the team. Thank you for listening, Kings fans.